The massive orbital station Celestial Harmony groaned like a dying beast as sparks erupted from its core systems. The entire structure, larger than most moons, trembled in the void of space. What had been the galaxy's most advanced trading hub just moments before was now plunging into darkness. Emergency sirens wailed throughout the chrome corridors as red warning lights bathed everything in an ominous glow. The station's artificial gravity fluctuated wildly, causing loose objects to float and crash unpredictably. Somewhere deep in the bowels of the massive structure, something very expensive was breaking apart. In the main control room, chaos reigned supreme. Engineers from 12 different alien species crowded around holographic displays that flickered with dire warnings. The air shimmered with their advanced scanning equipment, creating a light show of panic and desperation. The Valarian chief engineer stood at the center of it all, his tall crystalline body catching and refracting the emergency lighting like a living prism. His species had built some of the most sophisticated technology in the known galaxy, and right now, all of it was telling him the same terrible news. "The quantum matrix has collapsed into a recursive loop," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "The core is feeding back on itself. Every second we delay makes it worse." His crystal form darkened as he processed the data streaming across his neural interfaces. "This is impossible to repair. We must evacuate immediately." Around him, other alien engineers nodded grimly. The insectoid Catharians clicked their mandibles in distress, while their compound eyes analyzed readouts that made no sense. The gaseous Nephilim engineers floated in their containment suits, their forms swirling with agitation as they confirmed the devastating diagnosis through their cloud-based consciousness. A massive Gorlonian engineer, built like a walking tank, with arms that could crush steel, actually whimpered as he stared at his instruments. "My people have maintained fusion cores for 1,000 years, he rumbled in his deep voice. "I have never seen anything like this. The station will tear itself apart within the hour." The room buzzed with translations as each species communicated. The same message to their respective fleets: prepare for emergency evacuation. 30,000 beings lived and worked on Celestial Harmony. Getting them all to safety would be a logistical nightmare, assuming they even had enough time. In the corner of the control room, barely noticed by the sophisticated alien minds, frantically working to solve an impossible problem, stood Lee Do-hyun. The human maintenance worker wore the same simple grey coveralls he put on every morning for the past 3 years. His toolbox, scratched and dented from countless repairs, sat at his feet like a faithful dog. Do-hyun was what the aliens politely called support staff. He cleaned the air filters they forgot about, unclogged the pipes they never thought about, and fixed the little problems that were beneath the notice of their advanced engineering minds. To most of the station's crew, he was invisible, just another human doing the jobs that nobody else wanted to do. He listened to the aliens debate evacuation procedures and watched their holographic displays paint pictures of doom. The quantum matrix looked like a tangle of angry lightning, feeding back on itself in an endless loop of destruction. Their scanners showed cascade failures spreading through every major system, but Do-hyun had been working in the station's mechanical spaces for 3 years. He knew the sound of every pump, the vibration of every generator, the way the whole massive structure breathed like a living thing. And right now, he could feel something that their fancy instruments couldn't detect. The human picked up his battered toolbox and took a step forward. The simple action somehow cut through all the alien chatter. "I can fix it," he said quietly. The control room fell silent. Every alien eye, sensor, and optical device turned toward the small human in the corner. For a moment, the only sound was the distant groaning of the dying station. Then the Valarian chief engineer's crystalline form brightened with what could only be described as amused condescension. A sound like wind chimes filled the air as he laughed. "Human, this is quantum engineering on a scale your species cannot comprehend. We are dealing with forces that require—" His words were cut off as the Catharian engineers began their own chittering laughter, mandibles clicking in mechanical amusement. The massive Gorlonian's deep chuckle rumbled through the deck plating, while the gaseous Nephilim swirled in patterns that their species used to express humor. Soon, the entire control Room echoed with alien laughter. Here was a simple maintenance worker, a member of one of the galaxy's youngest and most primitive species, claiming he could solve a problem that had stumped the greatest engineering minds in known space. The human janitor stood quietly in the corner, still holding his simple toolbox, waiting for the laughter to die down. In his eyes was something the aliens had missed in their rush to judgment, the calm confidence of someone who had spent years listening to the heartbeat of their home. The alien engineers spread out across the station like a high-tech army, their equipment worth more than entire planetary budgets. Molecular scanners hummed as they analyzed matter at the atomic level. Quantum analyzers projected three-dimensional maps of subspace distortions. The Valerian chief engineer commanded a team of floating diagnostic drones that could detect problems, smaller than viruses. Meanwhile, Lee Do-hyun walked calmly toward the nearest maintenance hatch, carrying nothing but his old flashlight, a beat-up multi-tool that had seen better decades, and a roll of silver industrial tape that he'd been using for everything from pipe repairs to holding his lunch together. The contrast was almost comical. On one side stood the pinnacle of galactic technology, beings whose ancestors had been building starships when humans were still discovering fire. On the other side walked a single human maintenance worker who looked like he was heading out to fix a leaky faucet. Commander Yoon Min-ji sat in the secondary control room, watching everything unfold through the station's security network. As the only other human in a position of authority, she felt responsible for whatever chaos Do-hyun was about to unleash. Her fingers drummed nervously on the console as she tracked his movements through the camera feeds. "Computer, show me maintenance." "Worker Lee Do-hyun's current location," she ordered. The screen lit up with a view of Do-hyun prying open a service panel that clearly displayed warning signs in 17 different languages. Each symbol basically said the same thing. Danger. Authorized personnel only. Death or dismemberment likely. Do-hyun ignored them all and crawled inside. "Oh no," Min-ji whispered, watching him disappear into the station's mechanical intestines. "He's going completely off protocol." In the main control room, the aliens were setting up equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. The Cytherian engineers deployed scanning arrays that created visible beams of light, mapping every molecule in a 50-meter radius. The Nephilim floated their consciousness-driven repair drones through the corridors, their gaseous forms piloting machines that cost more than small planets. But down in the maintenance tunnels, Do-hyun was doing something that would have horrified every safety inspector in the galaxy. He was actually touching things. The quantum core's problems were invisible to human eyes, but Do-hyun had learned to read the station through his other senses. He pressed his ear against pipes, listening to the flow of coolant and the whisper of energy conduits. His hands traced along power cables, feeling for the subtle vibrations that meant trouble. Where the aliens saw impossibly complex quantum entanglement requiring delicate recalibration with million-credit instruments, Do-hyun saw what he'd always seen: pipes that carried stuff from one place to another, wires that moved power around, and moving parts that sometimes got stuck. The first thing he noticed was that panel C47 was vibrating wrong. It should have hummed at a steady frequency, but instead it was stuttering like a broken engine. Do-hyun pulled out his multi-tool and started removing screws. Up in the control room, alarms began screaming. "What is he doing?" demanded the Zeridian technician, his reptilian features twisted with horror as his scanners showed a human directly interfacing with critical systems. "He's bypassing every safety lockout." Commander Min-ji watched her screens with growing dread as Do-hyun's simple actions triggered cascading warnings throughout the station's computer network. Every system he touched sent panic signals to the main computers, which had been programmed by alien minds that couldn't imagine someone working without proper authorization codes. "He's going to kill us all," the Zeridian muttered, his scaled hands dancing over his controls as he tried to predict what disaster would strike first. But Do-hyun had found something interesting. Behind panel C47 was a junction box that his flashlight revealed to be partially melted. The sophisticated alien diagnostic equipment hadn't detected it because they were looking for quantum anomalies and subspace distortions. They weren't checking for something as simple as burned-out electrical connections. The human maintenance worker did what came naturally to him. He hit it with his wrench. The metallic clang echoed through the maintenance tunnel and somehow transmitted through the station's structure to the main control room, where every alien engineer simultaneously cringed. In their cultures, precision instruments and careful calibration were the only acceptable approaches to complex problems. What Do-hyun was doing looked like vandalism. Percussive maintenance, Minji whispered to herself, recognizing the technique. Humans had been fixing things by hitting them since they first picked up rocks. It shouldn't work on quantum-level technology, but somehow it often did. Another clang rang through the station as Do-hyun applied his wrench to a different component. This time, one of the warning lights in the control room actually flickered, from red to amber. The Gorlonian engineer stared at his readouts in confusion. That actually improved the quantum coherence in Sector 7, he rumbled. Do-hyun continued his work, following instincts that had been honed by 3 years of keeping the station running when nobody was looking. He listened to the mechanical heartbeat of the massive structure, felt for problems through vibrations in the deck plates, and fixed things the same way humans had always fixed things, with patience, experience, and the occasional application of controlled violence. Each bang of his hammer sent shockwaves of terror through the alien crew, who could only watch their instruments and wonder how primitive techniques were somehow affecting systems that required advanced degrees to understand. The station's quantum core sat at the very heart of celestial harmony, buried behind layers of shielding, safety systems, and a maze of ventilation shafts that had been designed by engineers who never imagined anyone would need to crawl through them. The passages were barely wide enough for a human torso, twisting and turning through the station's superstructure, like mechanical arteries. For the larger alien species, reaching the core was impossible. The massive Gorlonian engineers were built like living tanks. Their shoulders alone were too broad to fit through the largest access tunnel. The Vailarians, despite their crystalline bodies, were too tall and rigid to navigate the sharp bends. Even the smaller Zeridians couldn't compress their reptilian forms enough to squeeze through the tightest sections. But humans were different. Evolution had given them flexible spines, collapsible rib cages, and the kind of stubborn determination that made them crawl into impossible spaces just to see what was on the other side. Do-hyun studied the schematic display that Engineering Officer Park Ji-hoon had pulled up on a portable screen. The maze of ventilation shafts looked like a three-dimensional puzzle designed by someone with a cruel sense of humor. The core is about 300 meters that way, Ji-hoon said, pointing down a shaft that looked barely wide enough for a large dog. But you'd have to navigate through 17 different passages, including 2 that require you to crawl upside down. Looks fun, Do-hyun replied, already stripping off his outer coveralls to reduce his bulk. He kept his tool belt, flashlight, and the roll of industrial tape that had become his signature accessory. The first shaft was horizontal and reasonably comfortable. Do-hyun crawled forward on his hands and knees, his flashlight beam dancing ahead of him as he navigated around support struts and cable runs. The metal walls were warm to the touch, heated by the energy conduits that ran parallel to the ventilation system. Behind him, he could hear Ji-hoon's voice echoing through the shaft, reporting his progress to the control room. He's entered the primary access tunnel, moving at approximately 1 meter per minute. The passage suddenly angled upward at a 45-degree slope. Do-hyun braced his feet against the walls and began climbing, his maintenance experience showing as he found handholds where others would see only smooth metal. Years of working in the station's hidden spaces had taught him how to read the subtle variations in the construction, finding the structural points that could support his weight. Halfway up the inclined shaft, he encountered his first real challenge. The passage split into 3 directions, each too narrow for anything larger than a human child. According to the schematic, he needed to take the middle path, which curved downward and to the left before opening into a slightly larger chamber. "This is where it gets interesting," Do-hyun muttered, speaking into his communicator as he squeezed into the narrow opening. The walls pressed against his shoulders, and he had to exhale completely to make his chest small enough to fit through the tightest section. In the control room, Park Ji-hoon translated the human's matter-of-fact observations to an increasingly amazed alien crew. The Valerian chief engineer was running calculations on his quantum computer, trying to understand how a being could navigate such confined spaces without suffering from claustrophobia or structural damage. "He says the airflow is wrong in this section," Ji-hoon reported as Do-hyun's voice crackled through the communicator. "He's following the ventilation patterns to find the source of the problem." This earned confused looks from the assembled aliens. The Catharians navigated by interpreting electromagnetic fields through their compound eyes. The Nephilim used their gaseous consciousness to detect molecular compositions in the air. The Golonians relied on ground-penetrating sonar that could map structures through solid metal, but here was a human claiming he could smell a quantum core malfunction. "Impossible," muttered the Zeridian technician. "His species lacks the sensory apparatus to detect quantum fluctuations through olfactory analysis." What the aliens didn't understand was that Do-hyun wasn't detecting quantum fluctuations. He was using senses that millions of years of evolution had honed for survival. The subtle change in air pressure that indicated a blocked ventilation path. The faint chemical odor that meant electrical components were overheating. The almost imperceptible vibration that suggested mechanical stress. Deep in the maze of shafts, Do-hyun encountered the section that had defeated the alien engineer's remote probes. The passage curved sharply downward before immediately angling, back up, creating an S-bend that required him to crawl upside down for nearly 50 meters. "Going into the inverted section now," he reported, his voice slightly strained as he maneuvered into position. Blood rushed to his head as he navigated the impossible curve, using his knees and elbows to maintain momentum, while his flashlight cast crazy shadows on the metal walls. The chamber beyond the S-bend opened into the core access area, and Do-hyun finally understood what the alien instruments had missed. The quantum core itself was functioning perfectly, a marvel of engineering that pulsed with contained energy, like a mechanical heart. But surrounding it were dozens of support systems that the sophisticated scanners had ignored. Climate control units, backup power relays, emergency cooling systems. And in the corner, almost hidden behind a bundle of fiber optic cables, was a simple electrical junction box that looked like it had been installed when the station was first built. The box was corroded, its metal casing green with oxidation. Inside, Do-hyun could see what had caused the quantum matrix to collapse into its recursive loop, a blown fuse that cost about 2 credits and could be replaced by anyone with 5 minutes of training. "Found it," he said into his communicator, his voice carrying a mixture of amusement and disbelief. "You're not going to believe this." The moment Do-hyun touched the corroded junction box, celestial harmony went completely insane. The artificial gravity generators, which had maintained perfect stability for decades, suddenly began fluctuating like a broken carnival ride. In the main control room, the Golonian engineer found himself floating helplessly toward the ceiling, his massive frame spinning slowly in zero gravity. A second later, gravity slammed back on at triple strength, crushing him to the deck with bone-jarring force. "What is happening?" he roared, struggling to stand as gravity shifted again, this time pulling sideways toward the starboard bulkhead. The atmospheric processors throughout the station began screaming like banshees. Air recycling systems that normally whispered quietly in the background suddenly roared to life, creating wind tunnels in corridors that had never experienced so much as a breeze. Loose papers, tools, and personal belongings swirled through the air like miniature tornadoes. In Sector 12, a group of Zeridian merchants found themselves caught in a sudden atmospheric reversal. The air itself seemed to be flowing backward, creating pressure waves that made their sensitive hearing organs ring with pain. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut randomly throughout the station, trapping confused aliens in corridors that had been safe just moments before. But the most disturbing development was the station's artificial intelligence system. ARIA, the Advanced Reasoning and Information Assistant, had been the pride of galactic AI development, capable of communicating fluently in over 3,000 languages. Now she was speaking in ancient Earth dialects that hadn't been used for centuries. "Huet, Michael Ifel Kimd," Arya announced over the station-wide communication system, her normally smooth voice crackling with electronic distortion. Park Ji-hoon stared at his translation console in confusion. "She's speaking Old English," he reported to the panicked control room. "Something about great evil approaching." The Vailarian chief engineer's crystalline form was flashing in patterns. That indicated extreme distress. His advanced scanners were showing cascading system failures throughout the station, power grids overloading, life support systems switching to emergency backup, and quantum containment fields fluctuating dangerously. "The human has destabilized the entire station," he declared, his voice carrying harmonics of terror. "Every system is failing simultaneously." On the holographic displays, red warning indicators bloomed like digital flowers of doom. Hull integrity. Warnings flashed as the station's superstructure groaned under stresses it was never designed to handle. The fusion reactors were cycling through emergency shutdown procedures, their safety systems triggered by readings that made no sense. "Abort! Abort!" screamed the Zeridian technician, his reptilian features pale with fear. "He's going to tear the station apart." The Catharian engineers were clicking their mandibles in panic patterns, their compound eyes tracking dozens of system failures simultaneously. Their hive mind collective was processing the disaster faster than individual consciousness could handle. And the result was pure terror. Even the gaseous Nephilim were swirling in agitation, their containment suits struggling to maintain cohesion as their consciousness cloud forms responded to the chaos around them. But Captain Kim Hye-jin stood calmly in the command center, watching Do-hyun's progress through the security cameras. While chaos erupted around her, she focused on the small screen showing the human maintenance worker, methodically replacing the corroded components in the junction box. His face was a mask of concentration, completely ignoring the alarms blaring through his communicator. His hands moved with practiced precision, each action deliberate and controlled. Where the aliens saw catastrophic system failure, Hye-jin saw something else: organized troubleshooting. "Captain!" Commander Minji burst into the command center, her uniform disheveled from fighting through the fluctuating gravity fields. "We need to evacuate immediately. The station is coming apart." Around them, the alien crew was abandoning their posts. The Gorlonian engineers were already sealing themselves into emergency escape pods. The Vailarians had activated their crystalline stasis fields, preparing for rapid transportation to safety. Even the normally stoic Zeridians were gathering their post-essential equipment for immediate departure. "Captain, please," Minji pleaded as another gravity wave sent loose equipment flying across the command center. "We have 30,000 beings on this station." Hye-jin watched Do-hyun's steady hands working in the core chamber. The human was completely focused on his task, methodically checking each connection and replacing damaged components with improvised parts from his toolkit. The industrial tape that had become his trademark was being used to secure temporary fixes that looked absolutely ridiculous, but somehow held together under impossible stresses. "Look at his face," Hye-jin said quietly. Pointing to the monitor, Minji looked. Despite the chaos erupting around him, despite the alarms screaming through his communicator, despite the fact that the entire station seemed to be tearing itself apart, Do-hyun looked calm. Not just calm, confident. "He knows what he's doing." Hye-jin realized. "But the readings," Minji started, "are measuring things the aliens understand," Hye-jin interrupted. "But this is human engineering now." The station shuddered as another wave of system failures cascaded through the superstructure. Emergency lighting bathed everything in red as Arya continued her announcements in ancient languages, now switching between Old Norse and Classical Latin. "Captain, with respect, this is madness," Minji said. Hye-jin made her decision. Over the station-wide communication system, she broadcast to every alien crew member preparing for evacuation. "This is Captain Kim Hye-jin. All personnel will remain at their stations. Let him work." The alien crew stared at her in disbelief. Their instruments were showing complete system failure. Their safety protocols demanded immediate evacuation, and their most advanced engineering. Minds couldn't comprehend what was happening. But deep in the core chamber, Do-hyun continued his repairs with the methodical patience of someone who had spent years fixing things that nobody else understood.